Hey guys, tonight we're digging into something a little unusual. Not treasure, not a sword and a stone, not even a haunting Viking battle cry echoing through the fjords, although that'd be cool too. No, tonight we're sinking into the ink, and I mean that literally. We're going to trace ancient needles across frozen skin, try and make sense of the marks left behind. The topic? Viking tattoos. Or, well, whatever survives of them after centuries buried in peat, ice, and occasional museum drawer mislabeled miscellaneous artifacts. You've heard stories of bearded raiders sailing stormy seas, screaming Valhalla, and swinging axes like they're on a caffeine high. But have you ever wondered what might have been inked beneath their armor? What symbols they carved into their skin? Whether it was all runes and ravens, or maybe just a sketchy Midgard serpent that looked more like a worm. You're about to walk through frostbitten fields, past mossy stones and creaking longhouses, to peek into one of the most overlooked corners of Viking life, what they wore beneath the wool. Not silk, not Gucci chainmail, but tattoos etched with pain, purpose, and probably a bit of ego. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're in Pittsburgh or Prague, drop your location and the time in the comments. I love knowing who's listening and what kind of moonlight you've got tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a frozen shoreline. Sea spray catching the last glimmer of sunlight. The air stings your face like a slap from an angry snowman. Your boots crunch over ice-crusted seaweed as you follow the outline of a shipwrecked hull. Its planks warped by salt and age. A faint scent of tar and pine smoke follows you, mingling with something metallic. Old blood? Or maybe the iron memory of war. You're not sure, but something's calling. A carved stone juts from the tundra ahead. Not just any stone. This one's leaning, half buried, but covered in a tangle of symbols, interlocking knots, serpents swallowing their own tails, and one eye that seems to follow you. You don't read Old Norse, but you feel the message in your bones. That's when you notice the figure beside the stone. Their faces hidden under a hood of fur and shadow, but their arms are bare to the cold, muscular, weathered, and inked. Not modern ink. Not a quote from Nietzsche or a barbed wire bicep. These are marks of meaning, of belonging, of belief, and pain, especially pain. You want to ask what they mean, but they vanish before you can form the words. That's the thing with Viking tattoos. They don't explain themselves. They linger like ghosts. You have to chase them down. So you follow. You duck into a longhouse. Smoke curling up into rafters slick with years of soot. People are sitting around the fire, carving bones, sharpening blades, eating what you hope is lamb. But your eyes keep drifting to their skin. Bare arms poking from tunics, necks stretched as they laugh, legs crossed, boots off. And there they are, tattoos. Some are bold, a Thor's hammer spanning a shoulder blade, black as midnight. Others are more delicate, tiny lines behind an ear, or runes tracing down a finger like notes in a secret song. A woman braids her son's hair, and you catch the tail of the dragon curling around her wrist. A boy no older than 10 has dots tattooed along his collarbone. Counting something? Years? Kills? Siblings he's trying not to lose track of? But not everyone here is inked. A few glance sideways. One man shifts uncomfortably when you stare too long. You realize then, this isn't just art. This is identity. Politics. Faith. And maybe a little bit of flexing. Of course, we don't actually have Viking Instagram, to confirm any of this. So how do we know? We look at the dead and at the bog bodies. Now I know, cozy bedtime topic, right? But these are the MVPs of historical sleuthing. People who somehow ended up preserving the oxygen-poor muck of peat bogs, frozen in time like forgotten action figures in a prehistoric sandbox. Their hair still clings to their skulls. Their fingernails stay sharp, and in rare, jaw-dropping cases, their tattoos survive. There's one you find particularly fascinating, the so-called Otzi of the North. He's not Viking, technically, he's older, but his ink, it's still there. Tiny dashes along the spine, like Morse code for ghosts. Other bog bodies from the later Iron Age and Viking periods show similar marks, dots, bands, even crude animal shapes. Were they medicinal? Magical? Trendy? Some scholars argue they were for pain relief, tattooed over pressure points, like permanent acupuncture. Others say no, these were symbols of status, or clan, or something more spiritual. You lean in, squinting at the dry parchment of preserved skin. The marks are faint, but they're real. And yes, the academic world still debates them vigorously in dusty halls and footnote battles. Was it shamanic? Were they prisoners? Was it simply fashion? One researcher even suggested they were ancient equivalents of name tags, which, I guess, will be very helpful during Viking speed dating. The challenge is that the Vikings didn't leave behind tattoo instruction manuals. No, how to ink your first Thor hammer without upsetting Odin's scroll. What they did leave were clues, poems, carvings, sagas, and the occasional suspiciously decorative skeleton. You think about Ibn Fadlan, the Arab traveler who visited the Volga Vikings, Rus people, and mentioned in passing that they had dark green trees and figures from nails to neck. That's not your average spa review. Some say this proves tattoos were widespread. Others argue he misunderstood, or the translation's off, or maybe it was war paint. Again, historians love arguing. It's their cardio. But you're forming your own theory, quietly, like a detective with a hunch and too much time on their hands. You think the Vikings used tattoos the way we do now, to mark stories on their skin, sometimes sacred, sometimes stupid, sometimes both. The fire in the longhouse crackles low. You hear someone humming a lullaby in Old Norse, soft, repetitive, with the rhythm of waves on a hull. You lie back on a fur mat, letting your thoughts drift. You imagine a tattoo artist 1,000 years ago, not with gloves and sterilized needles, but bone tools heated in fire, dipped in soot or crushed charcoal, or maybe even fermented ash from sacred trees. You picture a warrior gritting his teeth as the ink bites in, not flinching, not because he's tough, but because flinching would shame his ancestors, or worse, make the raven tattoo look like a deformed duck. You picture mother tracing symbols on her own arm, matching them with those on her child, a connection written into flesh. You picture a teen sneaking out, begging a traveling skull for a cool rune, and ending up with something that actually means fish soup, because people don't change that much. Ink is forever. Or, at least for a very long time, especially when buried in the right bog. Outside, the wind howls across the snow, but you feel warm, safe, tucked into a moment far away from now. We've only just begun tracing this story across time. Sleep easy. I'll keep the fire going. You awaken, or at least you think you do. Everything remains a little hazy, but now you find yourself standing in a soggy, shadowed field. The ground shifts beneath your feet with each step, like someone buried 1,000 forgotten mattresses just beneath the moss. Welcome to the bog. The air is damp and thick with the smell of wet roots, decaying leaves, and something faintly metallic, like an old pocket watch left out in the rain. Or maybe blood. Hard to tell. You shouldn't feel this calm here, and yet you do. You take another step, and something squelches beneath your boot. The earth opens like it's exhaling, and there it is, a human arm, curled and leathery, the skin darkened to a dusty apricot brown. But that's not what stops your breath. No, it's the faint, linear mark running along the forearm. A tattoo. It's one thing to see ink on the living, on sun-kissed shoulders, peeking from beneath sleeves in a coffee shop. But this is ink on someone who died over 1,000 years ago, who was likely placed here, intentionally or not, by people who believed this marsh could hold secrets safely. And so far, they've been right. You tread carefully, the bog sloshing with every footfall, the landscape whispering secrets in reed rustles, and the faint hum of wind across still water. Ahead of you stands a figure, hooded, clipboard in hand, boots caked in ancient mud, a field archaeologist. This is Talon Man, they murmur, gesturing toward a preserved body curled gently into the earth. Not Viking, strictly speaking, but still an incredible example. You nod. Talon Man lived over 2,400 years ago and died, likely sacrificed, in a ritual. His body, though not tattooed, led to the discovery of others that were, like the man found in Greenland, bearing ink dots along his ribs. Some scholars believe these dots mark pressure points, primitive acupuncture for joint pain. Others argue they were symbolic, talismans of strength or charms to ward off spirits. Some even whisper that they were a form of early body journaling. Naturally, historians continue to argue about it, somewhere between reverent debate and caffeinated academic cage match. Was it healing? Was it sacred? Or was it just fashion? You lean over one of the bodies, peering closely. The mark is faint but unmistakable, a looping shape, possibly a serpent or an abstract rune. It doesn't shout its purpose. It only waits to be interpreted. Farther on, you approach another body. Female, not young, not old. Her left wrist still wears a silver bangle, now tarnished and dulled. On her shoulder is a small spiral tattoo, clear as ever. Strangely, it lies beside a healed wound. You can't help but wonder, was this ink added after the injury? A mark of recovery? A warning? A badge of survival? One theory suggests Viking tattoos were used to mark wounded areas, perhaps to protect them magically or to honor them. Think of it like ancient battlefield scrapbooking, but with way more blood. Or maybe it's like a sticker that says, "I survived," only permanent and way more metal. You pause near a rise in the bog, where the wind whistles louder and the reeds bend with unseen rhythms. In your mind, you can almost see it, a Viking funeral rite. Hooded figures, silent and reverent, a body laid gently into the peat, charms buried alongside, maybe a whispered chant in Old Norse. But here's the thing, most people didn't end up in bogs. Only a few did, often because of something unusual. Maybe they were criminals, maybe they were honored, or maybe the bog simply claimed them. That's the frustrating part. The tattoos we found only represent a tiny sliver of a much larger culture. A culture that didn't leave instruction manuals or ink catalogs. No Viking edition of tattooing for dummies. Just fragments. Just skin and speculation. There's one man, unofficially dubbed the St. Cuthbertson body, who bears a rune just behind the ear. Algize, it seems, the symbol of protection. Scholars debate whether he was a warrior, branding himself for battle, or a slave praying for mercy. One expert even suggested it could have been a spiritual GPS for the afterlife. It makes you think. If you were about to pass into the next world, what would you want inked onto your skin? A dragon curling for strength? The name of a loved one? A little rune that says, "Return to sender"? There's something deeply human about wanting your body to speak, even after your voice is gone. As you climb out of the bog, your boots heavier with peat than dignity. The wind softens. A raven calls in the distance. You look up. For a second, you imagine you see runes etched on its wings. Probably just your imagination. Still, you know what you saw down there. And you know it wasn't just art. It was memory, story, prayer. And it's still here, waiting for someone to listen. Someone like you. You lie back in the moss. The sky above is tinged with twilight. A gentle hush covers the land. And if you listen closely, really closely, you might still hear the stories murmured beneath the bog. Stories written in ink, blood, and silence. You feel the cold by the northern wind as you rise to your feet, your boots thick with peat, your thoughts still echoing with the whispers of the bog. But now the focus shifts. You're not just chasing symbols etched into skin. You're going to find out how they got there. Because somewhere between mystery and meaning lies the method. And trust me, it's not glamorous. You find yourself walking toward a wooden hut, nestled at the edge of a pine forest. Smoke curls from the chimney. The scent of burning birch bark and something oddly sweet clings to the air. The door creaks as you step inside. A woman waits by the fire, sleeves rolled, tools spread across a fur-covered table. Not scalpels, not ink guns, but things that look handmade, improvised, brutal. She glances at you with a smirk. You came for the ink? You nod, and she begins to explain, not with words, but with gestures. She picks up a shard of bone, carved to a needlepoint, then a fish spine, then the quill of a sea urchin. Each one could puncture skin. Each one has. You recognize the look of a tool that's drawn blood more often than it's drawn praise. Then comes the ink. Forget your modern bottles of sterile black ink. Viking tattoo pigment was a DIY nightmare. You're looking at a tiny bowl filled with, well, it's black. That's about all you can say for sure. The ingredients vary depending on which group or region you're in, but common candidates include charcoal, burned from sacred trees or bones, ground fine, mixed with water, spit, or animal fat. Soot, scraped from long house hearths. Crushed iron, for a faint reddish tinge, like dry blood. Fermented plant ash, because nothing says permanent decision, like using garden waste that's been aged like bad wine. Some rumors even say they use snake venom or urine. You lean back slightly at that one. The tattooist shrugs. Pain's part of it. Her eyes seem to say. She begins to demonstrate the technique. Slow, deliberate, with a rhythm that feels almost ritualistic. Dip jab, over and over, tiny dots forming patterns. Not lines, dots. You realize this isn't just art. It's time, pain, and focus made visible. Some scholars believe early Norse tattooing used a method similar to hand poking. Single points tapped repeatedly into the skin with sharpened tools. No rapid buzzing, no whirring coils. Just repeated trauma, lovingly applied. And it wasn't fast. A single armband could take hours. Larger pieces, days. Healing time? Long. An infection? Oh, definitely. Especially when the antiseptic was snow and the painkiller was maybe some mead. You rub your own arm instinctively. Maybe that Viking in your imagination, the one with the giant raven on his back, was just really committed or really drunk. You hear a familiar voice in your head, But how do we know this is what they did? Great question. There are no surviving Viking instruction scrolls that say, Step 1, find angry squid. But researchers have inferred their methods by examining the preserved patterns, the depth of pigment, and, most tellingly, the wear marks on the tools found at burial sites. Some of those tools, when placed under microscopes, show we're consistent with skin piercing, not carving or sewing. That's not proof, exactly, but it's compelling. The kind of clue that makes archaeologists giddy and skeptics grumble into their coffee. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some argue the tools were used for sewing hides. Others say they were ritual objects, not tattoo implements at all. Once again, historians are locked in an eternal cage match, this time over whether that bone shard is a needle or just a very pointy conversation starter. But you've seen the evidence. You've felt the atmosphere. You're forming your own conclusion, tentatively, like dipping your toe into icy fjord water. Outside the hut, you see a young man, bare-chested despite the cold. His arm is outstretched, trembling slightly, but his face is set. The tattooist taps ink into his skin, a winding trail of runes forming a name. Maybe his father's, maybe a god's. You don't ask. It's painful to watch. But he doesn't flinch. Not once. There's pride in the pain. And maybe that's the point. Later, you're walking to the twilight woods, thinking about how different this is from the sterile, neon-lit tattoo parlors of modern cities. No gloves. No buzzing. No font charts on laminated walls. But the intention? That's timeless. They tattooed to remember, to protect, to belong, to challenge the gods, to celebrate the living, to mourn the dead. They bled, not for fashion, but for permanence. And just like that, you remember something from before, a mark you saw on a bog body, a shape like a hammer, but not quite. You now realize it might have been made with one of these tools. One jab at a time, across hours, across lifetimes. You sit beneath a tree, fingertips brushing the bark. You imagine the tattoos in the dark, glowing faintly like embers, not loud, not flashy, just there. You wonder what it would have meant in that world to be marked by ink. Would people respect you, fear you, avoid you? Would it bind you to a clan, or isolate you as someone touched by spirits? The woman in the hut seemed to carry her own answers, but she's gone now, vanished like smoke. The stars begin to appear above, shimmering between the pine boughs. You lie back against a patch of moss, the cold seeping in slowly like forgotten dreams. Somewhere in the distance, you hear drumming, a slow rhythm like the tapping of bone on skin. Maybe it's just wind. Maybe it's memory. But the ink is still out there, written on flesh, pressed into legend, and humming quietly through time. And tomorrow, you'll follow its trail even further. You wake in her sky like worn wool, gray, soft, endless. Dew clings to your eyelashes, and the pine needles above you form crooked constellations. But it's not the sky you're watching. It's your own arm. Or rather, what could be your arm if it had just been inked 1,000 years ago? You trace your finger along an invisible line, imagining the symbols. A serpent coiling around your forearm, a rune pressed into your wrist. Maybe a knot so tangled it could pass for a pretzel if you squinted hard enough. It's time to figure out what these designs actually meant, or at least try. Because here's the thing. Viking tattoos didn't come with captions. No helpful arrows saying, "This knot means protection," or "This raven was a dare after 3 horns of mead." What we're left with is a stew of possibility, what you might call, in your sleepy state, symbol soup. You begin walking again. The woods thin out into open grassland, where scattered stones lean drunkenly in circles. Runes have been carved into many of them, deep, straight lines, intersecting at severe angles, with no curves, no frills. Stark, intimidating, beautiful, in that would make a great metal album cover kind of way. You kneel beside one. Your fingers hover over the runes, not daring to touch. This one looks like a fork. That one, a tiny tree. Another seems to resemble a bow tie, if bow ties had mystical powers and judged your soul. You whistle the sound of each rune aloud. Fehu Yuras, all Jai's Raidho. Their meanings blur across time. Wealth, strength, protection, journey. But the truth? Their meaning changed depending on who carved them and when. You could call it an early form of emoji, except imagine each emoji meaning 5 different things, depending on the phase of the moon and whether or not you're going to skate that week. You head into a low, grassy hut at the edge of a fjord. A man inside greets you silently with a nod. He gestures to a wall where drawings have been etched in to hide. Not paintings, drawings of tattoos. They've been passed down like recipes, worn and smudged with age. You study the images. There's a Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, wrapped in an endless circle, biting its own tail. A classic, endless cycle. Protection. Maybe chaos. Maybe just a bad day for the tattoo artist with hand cramps. There's a Valknut, 3 interlocked triangles. Some say it symbolizes the afterlife. Others think it's Odin's mark. Others still believe it just looked cool on shields. Historians? Still debating. Of course. You also spot Yggdrasil, the world tree, its roots and branches sprawling like a cosmic roadmap. And there beside it, Hugin and Munin, Odin's ravens, thought and memory. A 2-bird combo perfect for anyone trying to pass a final exam. The man sees your fascination. He points to his own neck, then pulls back the collar of his tunic. A small rune sits just behind his ear, Laguz, the symbol of water, flow, intuition. You're starting to get the picture. These weren't just decorations. They were identities. Ideas pressed into skin. Philosophies that you carry like armor. Of course, there's always a twist. You remember the tale of a young warrior named Freki who had a large knotwork tattoo across his back. It was said to protect him in battle. The only problem? He couldn't explain what it meant. It looked fierce, he allegedly said. Modern scholars call this the aesthetic problem, when something looks symbolic but no one remembers why. A bit like getting a tattoo in Chinese characters that accidentally means spicy duck. Which brings us to the best Viking mystery tattoos, the indecipherables. Some designs show up repeatedly in burial sites and surviving textiles, but no one knows what they mean. Are they tribal marks? Magical sigils? Secret family logos? Or just a 10th century version of live, laugh, longship? Again, no answers. Just educated guesses and arguments fueled by stale coffee and fragments of birch bark manuscripts. You step outside again, the wind pushing your hair back as if trying to read your thoughts. You pause by a shallow stream, watching your reflection. What if these tattoos weren't meant to be read by others? What if they were a conversation between the wearer and the divine, or even between the wearer and themselves? One story sticks with you, an old saga fragment about a woman who tattooed her dreams down her spine, so she'd never forget them. Each symbol represented a vision, a fear, a hope. No one else could interpret them. But to her, they were everything. Her body was her story. You look down again at your imaginary ink. Maybe the Viking who first inked a Midgard serpent didn't think, "This is my chaos." Maybe they just thought, this feels right. Maybe not every symbol has a translation. Maybe some things are meant to be felt, not explained. You lie down in the grass, the blades brushing your cheeks, the sky spinning slowly above you. The wind whistles a tune in the tall reeds, and for a moment, it almost sounds like words. Runes, maybe, or just your sleepy brain making poetry out of air. Either way, the symbols have found you, twisting and curling in your thoughts. Ink not on your skin, but somewhere deeper. You're ready to follow them, wherever they lead next. You wake to the smell of ash and salt, somewhere between a campfire and an old leather pouch that's held a secret for far too long. The ground beneath you is firmer now, drier. You've left the bogs, the huts, the quiet field behind. Now you're in the middle of something louder, not in sound, but in presence. You feel it in the ground, in your bones. A gathering is underway. You step cautiously into a wide clearing surrounded by stones arranged in a rough circle. A fire blazes at the center. Figures stand around it, silent but charged. Their skin glistens in the firelight, and what you thought were shadows reveal themselves as tattoos, spirals, beasts, runes, curling over collarbones, creeping across forearms, wrapping down spines like vines of meaning. This isn't fashion. This is something else. A man steps forward, ink gleaming across his scalp, jaw clenched as if biting back a scream or a vow. In one hand, he holds a piece of sharpened bone. In the other, a bowl of dark pigment that looks suspiciously like soot mixed with something far less poetic. He begins to tattoo himself. Right there in the firelight, you watch, half horrified, half hypnotized. This isn't just body art. This is a rite. Each stab of the needle is deliberate. With every dot, every puncture, he whispers something under his breath. A prayer? A name? A curse? You feel like you shouldn't be watching, but you can't look away. You're witnessing the moment ink and identity become one. And that brings us to the central question beating like a war drum beneath all this. Were Viking tattoos acts of ritual or rebellion? Did they ink their flesh to connect with the gods or to defy the world? Some believe tattoos were deeply spiritual, that they acted like sacred armor, marking the skin with runes of protection, courage, fertility, that each pattern was part of a magical system, a language that bridged the mortal and the divine. In that worldview, a tattoo wasn't just personal expression. It was devotion. You weren't just showing off. You were showing reverence, commitment, surrender. But there's another idea, one just as powerful, that these tattoos were acts of resistance. Picture a Viking chieftain returning home from foreign lands, bearing not gold, but a symbol scorched into his chest. Something not seen before in his clan. Maybe a mark from an enemy tribe. Maybe a stolen sigil from a Christian monk's manuscript. A mark of I went, I conquered, I came back, changed. To some, that's bravery. To others, that's blasphemy. The tattoo becomes a line in the sand, an identity that says, I do not belong entirely to you anymore. Now imagine a young woman, heired no title, no property, but with a raven inked across her shoulder blade. A message, perhaps. I carry my own omens. Or a slave, forbidden from speaking his native tongue, who carves forgotten rune into his thigh in secret. These are not ceremonies. These are protests. Small ones, quiet ones, but lasting. And so, the debate continues, both in modern scholarship and in your mind as you sit by the fire, watching the ink sink into skin. Some academics argue Viking tattoos were mostly ritual, that they had rules, that they were overseen by elders, skalds, or spiritual leaders. There are even whispers that certain symbols could only be worn after particular rites, like surviving a storm at sea, or facing down a berserker in combat. Others say the opposite, that tattoos were anarchic, folk-driven, even frowned upon by the elite in some regions, that the gods in demand ink only people did, and that some people wore it precisely because no one else would. Of course, the truth? Probably both, because humans have always been complicated like that. Sometimes we wear things to conform, other times to stand out, often both at the same time. The fire cracks. Someone tosses herbs into the flames, and the smoke curls upward in greenish plumes. You swear you see shapes inside, snakes, wolves, ships, or maybe your mind's playing tricks on you again. You think about modern parallels, tattoos done after breakups, after loss, after victory, matching ink between friends, a quiet rune on the ankle that no one sees but the wearer, ritual or rebellion. Yes, you lean back on your hands, warmth licking at your skin. Around you, the firelight reflects off every curve of ink. Some tattoos are fresh, still glistening with oil. Others faded, stretched by age, by scars, by life. And yet, each one tells a story, even if we don't know how to read it. You wonder how many of those stories were written during rites of passage, and how many were scratched in secret by moonlight. The symbols don't tell you, but the silence around the fire seems to hum with 1,000 possibilities. You let your eyelids drop, your breath slow with the embers. You imagine a hand tracing runes across your arm, marking you not as Viking, but as witness, not warrior, not rebel, just the one who listened. You wake to the creak of leather and the clink of bronze. Morning has broken, not with sunlight, but with motion. This time, the world stirs before you do. You're surrounded by warriors, but not in the way you expected. No snarling beards, no clanging swords. No, I drink from the skull of my enemy's energy. This is quieter, more measured, like a breath drawn before battle or before memory. You sit up slowly and realize this isn't a battlefield at all. It's a training ground. And what catches your eye first isn't the weapons. It's the ink. A young woman stands in the center, braided hair swinging behind her like a banner in the wind. She's spinning a wooden staff in deliberate arcs, each motion smooth, decisive. You watch the way her muscles move, and then there, on her shoulder, a tattoo flashes. Not large, not flashy, but precise. A compass of sorts. Or a knot. No, wait. It's a stylized raven, its wings forming the shape of a crescent moon. You know better by now than to ask what it means. You know the answer is always, it depends. But you do wonder, was this tattoo earned? Was it part of a rite, a clan bond, a battle memory? Or maybe just a whisper of freedom, written in ink? She turns toward you, and she smiles. Not a warrior's sneer, not a performer's grin, just a knowing smile as if to say, I see you wondering. You're not the first. Today, you learn that Viking tattoos weren't just a domain of warriors or men. They belonged to women too, and not in any ornamental sense. These tattoos told stories of strength, loss, motherhood, magic, and survival. Sometimes all at once. You follow the group as they practice, not with sword, but with shields, axes, staffs. Among them, older women, younger girls, some laughing, others focused, all marked in some way. One has vines coiled around her wrist, like ivy climbing towards something unseen. Another bears a band of runes around her neck, as if wearing a permanent torque. And there's a child no older than 8, with a single beneath each eye. Not makeup, not a smudge. Ink. Simple. Powerful. You raise a brow. Someone notices. They mark her family. A voice is beside you, 1 for each sibling. 2 faded now. She keeps them with her. You feel that more deeply than expected. Inside the longhouse, you examine artifacts left behind. Bone cones, carved beads, broken mirrors, and a strip of cloth bearing an inked outline, like a tattoo stencil. Women, it seems, were both recipients and creators of tattoo art. Some scholars suggest female seeresses, the volar, were responsible for tattooing rites. They held knowledge of symbols, healing herbs, and sacred ink recipes. Avalva's touch wasn't just ceremonial. It was transformational. A girl became a woman beneath the point of a needle, the sting marking the start of something new. But again, not everyone agrees. Some argue that women wouldn't have been allowed to tattoo, that the act itself was too sacred, too dangerous, too masculine. And yet, here you are, surrounded by inked women, living proof that historians aren't always invited to the party. You spend the afternoon in the sewing hall, watching women stitch patterns into cloaks. But not just any patterns. These are the same as the tattoos. Spirals, branches, runes. You realize the line between cloth and skin was thin, maybe even intentional. One woman points to her tunic, then to the back of her hand, where a similar symbol rests. This one protects me when I travel, she says, her voice like rustling flax. And this one, she traces the threadwork on her sleeve, was for my son before he left, for the sea. You don't ask if he returned. You don't have to. And then there's the shield maidens. You find them on the outskirts, near the edge of a cliff. The wind here is strong. Fitting for the kind of women who choose to stand where the land ends. They spar in pairs, breathing heavy, tattoos glinting through torn sleeves and sweat-slicked skin. One has a rune across her collarbone, so deep it looks carved, not inked. Another has a serpent twisting down her calf, its mouth open at her ankle, as if ready to strike. You ask yourself, were these marks battle-earned or battle-willed? Some sagas speak of Lagertha, of Hervor, of Freydes, women who fought like men and died like legends. Did they bear tattoos? We don't know. No saga pauses long enough to mention the ink beneath the armor. But now, standing here, watching these women move like tide and thunder, you believe they must have. Not because someone said so, but because this story would be incomplete without it. Night falls. You're seated once more by a fire, but this one crackles with laughter instead of tension. The women gather close, braiding hair, sharpening blades, and showing off ink in places you hadn't noticed before. One peels back her sleeve to reveal a pair of crosshammers, Thor's tools, drawn small, just below her elbow. My sons have the same, she says and chuckles. One got us in the wrong spot. His hammer faces down. We say that's why he can't cook. Laughter, warmth, stories sewn into skin and stitched into memory. You stretch out on the furs again, staring into the smoke. You understand something now. Tattoos weren't just marks of strength or resistance. They were layers, built into lives, into love, into lineage. Women didn't wear them to prove anything. They wore them because they could, and in doing so, they wrote themselves into history, not as footnotes, but as chapters. The first thing you feel is motion, not the gentle rise and fall of sleep, but a rhythmic sway, side to side, like being rocked in a cradle built by Thor and then tossed into the sea. Your body moves before your eyes open. You feel the creaking wood under you. The smell of salt, pitch, and wet will thicken the air. You open your eyes. You're on a longship. The deck groans beneath your feet as you stand. The mast rises like a dark spear into gray sky. Sails taut with wind. Around you, men and women row in silence. Faces calm, skin glistening with sea spray, and tattoos shining beneath their linen sleeves like whispers from the past. You walk between them. No one stops you, not because you're invisible, but because you belong here now. You look down at their arms, their legs, the backs of their necks, each person marked with ink that seems almost to move in the shifting light. Serpents winding around wrists, axes etched on knuckles, runes tucked just below the jawline, like a secret you're not ready to share. You wonder how many of these tattoos were added before battle, and how many after, because Vikings didn't just tattoo on land. They tattooed for the sea. Each voyage was a story, each raid a scar, each crossing a moment suspended between life and the end of it. And what better way to capture that tension than in ink? Some say the tattoos were there to protect the sailors. Sea runes drawn across shoulders, charms wrapped around ankles to keep the waves at bay. One symbol, Aegis Jalmer, the helm of awe, was said to confuse enemies, both mortal and magical. If it worked, hard to say. But people still use it today, which tells you something. Others say tattoos marked where a sailor had been, like stamps on a passport, but more painful and way hard to fake. A twisted knot? That meant the Irish coast. A stylized sunwheel? Maybe Spain. A whale's tooth shaded with blue soot? The cold northern seas. You spot one man with a star inked on the webbing between his thumb and finger. You've seen that before. A sailor star. The kind you tattoo, so your hands always remember which way is home. There's a story you recall, a fragment, really, about a young man named Skjold. Before his first voyage, he inked a small fish on his heel, just above the bone. "Why?" someone asked. He replied, "So if I die at sea, at least the fish will know I belonged." No one laughed, because they understood. You hear shouting ahead. The coastline is nearing. Tall cliffs rise like the backs of giants, moss-covered and unmoved by time. You brace yourself as the ship turns toward a narrow fjord. The rowers don't flinch. They know these waters, and these waters know them. You notice another thing. The tattoos aren't just decorations. They're communication. Before docking, one warrior rolls up his sleeve to show a series of marks, runes, notches, a specific pattern. The others nod, a silent agreement, a plan, a warning, a code. This wasn't art for art's sake. This was strategy. Tattoos spoke when voices couldn't, especially in foreign lands, especially in battle. And then there are the memorials. You find a carved or tucked beneath a coil of rope. Along the handle are tattoos, not freshly inked, but copied. One for each member of a lost crew. Copied by hand. Ink for the fallen. Because when someone dies at sea, the body is often lost, but the ink can live on, pass from friend to friend, arm to arm. A kind of quiet resurrection. You picture it. One sailor, drunk on grief, taking a needle and soot and pressing his friend's rune into his own skin. Not to forget, but to never forget. The ship docks. The hull grinds against stone smoothed by centuries of landings. You climb out slowly, legs weak from the movement, heart full of strange ache. A woman onshore greets you. Her arms are wrapped in swirling lines, like waves that never end. She points to your shoulder. "No ink?" she asks. "Not yet," you reply. She nods. then gestures to the sea behind you. Then you haven't truly traveled. You walk inland. The wind follows you. Salt clings to your hair. And the voices in the ship, quiet now, settle into the back of your mind, like lullabies hummed by a storm. You understand now that Viking tattoos weren't just for warriors. They were for sailors, for explorers, for wanderers who face the ocean's indifference and dare to say, "Mark me, so I won't be forgotten," because memory fades. But ink lingers. The wind carries you inland, away from salt and ship ropes, into a stillness that feels earned. The air is cooler here, pine tinge sharp in the nose. The ground beneath your boots is moss-covered stone, soft in places, unforgiving in others. And somewhere just beyond the tree line, you hear a sound you haven't heard before on this journey. A low groan. Human. Raw. You step into a clearing, and there it is. A man, middle-aged, scarred, breathing hard, sits on a flat rock, gripping his own arm with white-knuckled fingers. Another figure hovers over him, needle poised, dark pigment ready. Not soot this time, but something richer, almost red in tone. The pain is obvious. It shudders through him like a second heartbeat. But he doesn't pull away. You sit quietly in the grass, watching from a respectful distance. This is no casual decoration. No drunken flex. This is deliberate. Heavy. You squint at the design forming beneath the needle. It's a broken circle, jagged on one side, healed on the other. A wound. Closing. Today, you witness another truth of Viking tattoos. They are not only about strength or identity. Sometimes they are about regret, pain, penance. You've heard the sagas, the ones where a man takes up a blade, not for glory, but because vengeance demands it. You know the names: Carrie, Egil, Grettir. And behind each story, somewhere in the background, there's always aftermath. The quiet, the solitude, the shame. You remember one tale, half poem, half warning, about a man who lost his brother in a drunken fight. He tattooed his brother's name on his chest, just above the heart. The ink was made from ash taken from his brother's funeral pyre. That's not fashion. That's a wound that doesn't want to close. You begin to notice them more now. The quiet tattoos. A set of tally marks on the back of a woman's hand. 5 bold strokes. 1 slashed through. She catches you looking. "Children," she says. Then nothing more. Or the old man at the forge with a single rune above his collarbone. Nothes. The rune of need. Suffering. Restraint. You ask if it's for protection. He shakes his head slowly. "It's for memory," he says. No elaboration. Just heat, hammer, and the scent of scorched metal. The tattooist, different from the others, wears no ornaments, no flashy runes. Just a single line down the middle of their face. They tattoo slowly. Not with flair, but with gravity. These aren't the tattoos you show off in battle. These are the ones you get alone. And perhaps that's why they last longer. In mind, if not in sight. You remember a saying, "Old, crooked, whispered over mead. Ink near the bone remembers best." It's not about permanence. It's about depth. You come across a traveler with faded ink on his leg, nearly invisible except in firelight. It's shaped like a wolf, but not a majestic, snarling beast. No, this one is curled on itself, almost asleep, almost ashamed. You point to it. He shrugs. "I got it after I ran," he says. "Didn't want to fight. I left. Lost people." You expect judgment, regret, but his voice is calm. The tattoo isn't guilt. It's truth. In Viking life, Not all wounds came from blades. Some came from choices, from silence, from the long dark nights when you lie awake wondering if your gods are listening. And sometimes those wounds were marked not with words, but with ink to keep them close, to make sure they meant something. But pain isn't always about sorrow. Sometimes it's about pride. You return to the training grounds, where a warrior shows you a mark on her ribs, a long, looping symbol that took hours to finish. She tells you she didn't sleep, didn't eat, just lay there, breathing through the fire in her skin. Why, you ask? She smiles. Because I could. And you get it. The pain was the point. There's something timeless about this. You think of modern tattoos, ink after grief, after heartbreak, after survival. It's no different here. You see a mother with ink down her spine, one rune for each year her son was at war, and a blank space at the bottom, waiting. She tells you she hopes it stays empty. Her voice cracks. The sun sets behind the trees, throwing gold across a stone. You lie back, staring at the sky. You think about the marks we carry, the visible ones, the hidden ones, the ones we chose, the ones we didn't, and how sometimes the only way to make sense of them is to make them permanent. The fire crackles nearby. Someone is getting a tattoo. You hear the steady rhythm of the needle, like a heartbeat, like breath, like memory. Tonight, you wake to something different. Not a sound, not a scent, but a feeling, like the air around you is charged, humming, alive with something ancient that refuses to sleep. You sit up slowly. The stars above shimmer in strange configurations. The woods, usually dark and still, pulse faintly with blue light, and then you see them, figures moving silently through the trees, painted faces, bare feet, ink glowing softly under moonlight. You don't speak. You don't need to. This is not your night to ask questions. This is your night to witness. They call her the vulva, the seeress. She walks ahead, tall and hooded, hair woven with bones and beads that clink like wind chimes of storm. Her arms are bare despite the chill, and every inch of skin is tattooed, not with decoration, but with incantation. Lines, spirals, runes that seem to rearrange themselves when you blink. This is magic, not the card trick kind, not parlor games. This is the deep magic, the kind you don't play with, the kind that plays with you. Tonight's tattoos are not about memory or pain. They are not about rage or rebellion. They are about power. You follow the procession to a circle of stones. There's a fire in the center, its flames flickering blue, not orange. A concoction of herbs crackles in the pit, releasing smoke that smells of cedar, bloodroot, and something unnameable. The vulva begins. No words, just motion. She takes a bone needle and dips it into the mixture. A man steps forward, chest bare, eyes shut. She marks his skin with a single rune and says, the rune of divine breath, communication, inspiration. As the ink touches the skin, he shudders. His breath hitches. The crowd leans forward. And then nothing, just silence. But you feel it. Something has shifted. In Viking belief, the world was not divided into magic and not magic. Everything was interconnected. Gods breathed life into humans. Trees whispered fates. Runes weren't just letters, they were forces. To tattoo a rune wasn't just to spell something out. It was to summon it. You remember a tale of a warrior who bore the Tawaz rune, symbol of the god Tyr, over his heart. It was said his enemies' weapons would slide off his skin, that he could not be bound, could not be tricked. He eventually died. as we all do. But it took 6 men, 3 ropes, and a storm to bring him down. Coincidence? Maybe. But the rune was still there. A woman steps forward now. The vulva inks her with Birkenin, the rune of fertility, rebirth, growth. She places on the woman's belly, low and centered, then places her hand over it and murmurs a song so soft you can barely hear. This is not about appearance. This is invocation. This is calling something into being. And then it's your turn. You didn't expect it. No one speaks. But they all look at you. The vulva gestures. You step forward. She tilts her head, examining you as if reading a page only she can see. Then she reaches for the ink. You feel the needle. Cold, sharp, precise. Press against your forearm. You don't flinch. You don't breathe. And then it's over. You don't even know what symbol she gave you. But it tingles. It hums beneath your skin like it knows more than you do. And maybe it does. Later, you sit by the dying fire. You ask someone quietly if magic tattoos were common. They shrug. Common? No. Trusted? Always. Some scholars today claim magical tattoos were superstition, that there's no proof ink could bind protection or call visions. But others, archaeologists, rune specialists, a few oddly enthusiastic museum curators, believe there's enough circumstantial evidence to take it seriously. They cite saga fragments, burial rites, artifact arrangements. And they argue that if you believe in a world of gods, monsters, and fate carving trees, why wouldn't you believe in magical tattoos? Some even go further. They say certain combinations of runes are forbidden, too strong, too unstable. A rune too close to Thurisaz, the chaos rune, might bring protection or madness. Some tattoos were only applied during eclipses, some only after blood had been spilled, and some only if you were prepared to never sleep peacefully again. You lie back in the grass, your new tattoo still buzzing softly. You wonder what it means. You wonder what it wants. And you feel, for the first time, that your skin is no longer just yours. It carries something now. A whisper, a ward, a warning. The vulva is gone. The others have vanished into the mist. The fire has died, but the mark remains. And with it, a quiet knowing. Magic isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers from under your skin and waits. You wake with an ache in your arm, not pain exactly, but a weight, as if the ink from last night is burrowed deeper, as if it's no longer just in your skin, but threaded into something more private. You sit up slowly, blink through morning fog, and realize the world around you has changed again. No more fire circles, no mystical figures, just a village, a working one. Children chase each other through narrow paths. Goats wander where they're not supposed to. Women spin flax with practiced fingers, and men hammer iron into obedient shapes. This is not a ceremonial place. This is the part of Viking life that history doesn't carve into stone. The part that smells of sweat, of livestock, of old stew. It's the hum of everyday survival. And here, amid the rhythms of labor, you notice something else. Not all tattoos are celebrated. Not all ink is honored. Some is forced. Some is branding. You follow the sound of chopping wood and find a man stripped to the waist, arms thick with muscle, his skin crisscrossed by both scar and ink. The pattern is wrong. Not artistic. Not reverent. It's blunt. Ugly. A single rune repeated 3 times on his shoulder. You recognize it. RLO, the word for slave. He doesn't meet your gaze. He lifts his axe again. Chops once. Twice. The wood splits. Today, you learn the darker side of Viking tattooing, when ink was not expression, but oppression. Yes, Vikings raided. They explored. They traded. But they also took people. Captives from Britain, Ireland, Slavic lands. Dragged across seas to work fields, mend nets, build ships, and serve in silence. And sometimes to make sure they stayed in their place. They were marked, tattooed, branded. There are historical accounts, vague, scattered, describing how slaves were inked with identifying marks. A name, a symbol, a rune, sometimes on the hands, sometimes the forehead, sometimes worse. One tale tells of a woman who escaped 3 times. After the third, they tattooed the words Ninger across her collarbone, coward, outcast, worthless. She wore it for the rest of her life. No one knows what happened to her. A local elder takes you aside. He speaks in low tones, one eye glazed with age. There were rules, he says. If a man stole a slave, he'd be fined in silver. If he freed one, he'd gain honor. But if a slave ran, he shakes his head. The marks came after. You ask if anyone ever removed those tattoos. He chuckles, bitter. You can cut skin. Then softer, but not memory. You begin to notice the signs, hidden ink buried beneath sleeves and collars. Faint circles, half-erased words, the attempts to reclaim skin. Some succeeded, some didn't. You meet a woman in the weaving hall. Her hands are graceful, but her arms show patches of scarred-over pigment. She sees your gaze. No shame, she says, just history. She smiles, tight and tired. They marked me, but they never owned me. And yet, not all force ink came from outside. Some say that Viking societies branded their own criminals, that theft, cowardice, betrayal. These sins were not just punished by fine or exile, but by ink, not beautiful tattoos. Shame tattoos. A crooked Hagalaz rune, the hailstorm, pressed into a man's palm, meaning destruction, chaos. A red circle behind the ear, a rumor of treason, a black line down the tongue, so every word tasted like iron. It makes you shiver, because you realize something. Ink may fade, but its message never quite leaves. Even today, scholars argue about this. Was tattooing a common punishment, or was branding more typical? Was the ink voluntary, or was it just another kind of chain? Some claim there's no proof Vikings used tattooing this way. Others point to burial records, scars, and oral histories. As always, historians argue, and you listen to the gaps, to the silence, to the man still chopping wood. Before you leave the village, you return to the man with the slave brand. He's resting now, sweat cooling on his skin. You point gently to his tattoo. Have you ever covered it? He shakes his head. Why would I? He says. They want you to hide it. That's how they win. He stands. You keep it. You own it. Then he turns and walks back toward the fields. You head onward, the mark on your own arm pulsing with quiet heat. You understand something new now. Ink doesn't always tell who you are. Sometimes it tells who the world tried to make you and what you did in response. You walk into dusk with a heavier step, but a clearer purpose, because some stories aren't comfortable. They're just true, and those are the ones that must be remembered, even when written in pain. You wake to laughter, not the raucous kind that follows too much mead, and not the polite chuckle of elders around a hearth. This is the wild, snorting, can't keep it in kind of laughter, the kind that only ever belongs to teenagers. You blink and find yourself on the edge of a field, morning sun casting long, lazy shadows. A group of young Vikings, barely out childhood, are huddled near a stream, splashing water, shoving each other, passing something back and forth. At first you think it's food, but then you see the needle. They're tattooing each other, and not well. The ink is smeared. The lines are uneven. One boy has a rune that looks suspiciously like a duck instead of a wolf. Another girl is trying to tattoo a spiral onto her friend's forearm, tongue sticking out in concentration. It's charming, chaotic, slightly unsanitary, and incredibly familiar. You've seen this scene before, maybe in your cousin's garage, maybe in a dorm room. Different century, same impulse. Ink it now. Explain it later. You approach slowly, trying not to disturb their mischief. One of them spots you and grins. "Want one," she says, waving the needle. You raise an eyebrow. "What does it mean?" She shrugs. "Who knows? It just looks cool." A collective snort. Someone coughs on their own laughter. You're not here to scold. You're here to learn. This is a side of Viking tattooing you haven't seen yet. The impulsive, the personal, the completely unapproved. It turns out teenage rebellion is older than we thought. Some historians would have you believe Viking society was rigid, bound by clan custom, honor, blah, blah, blah. And sure, parts of it were. But these kids, they didn't get the memo. One boy shows you a jagged line down his forearm. "Dragon tail," he says proudly. "It looks like a bent stick," someone mutters. He shrugs. "Still bites." Another teen has 2 runes, one real, one fake. You ask why. He winks. "So my mother thinks it's a protection charm, but it actually means strong ale." You realize something. They're not mocking their culture. They're playing with it, reclaiming, reshaping, remixing, the way young people always do. And some of them are marking things that matter, even if they don't say it. You notice a girl with 3 dots inked along her wrist. You ask gently. She replies, "My brothers. They're gone, but this way they row with me." No jokes after that. Just quiet. You follow the group as they head toward a thicket of trees, where someone set up a crude workshop. Flat stone, bowl of ink, fire smoldering low. The air smells of pine pitch and singed hair. A teenage tattooist presides. Freckles, crooked grin, far too much confidence. He claims he's been tattooing since he was 12. You ask what pigment he uses. Mostly soot. Sometimes ground charcoal. Occasionally, he pauses, sniffing the bowl. "Berry juice. Does that work?" "Not really." He grins wider. You watch him work on a boy's shoulder. An attempt at a hammer, presumably Thor's, but it could easily be a smashed mushroom. And still, the boy beams like he's been knighted. You start to understand the psychology here. These teens don't have lands to defend. They're not chieftains. They're not poets. They're not yet legends. But they're carving space into their bodies. Space that says, "I was here." It's not always deep. It's not always wise. But it's theirs. You remember a scholar once scoffing in a lecture, saying Viking tattoos, if they existed, would have been reserved for rituals, not rowdy children. And now you wish you could show in this moment. A group of teens huddled under the trees, showing each other their fresh ink, teasing, admiring, adjusting. A silent pact made in pigment and peer pressure. A permanent joke. A lasting memory. A rite of passage all its own. One boy sits beside you. He doesn't speak at first. Just shows you his wrist. A crude X mark. You ask, "What's it for?" He shrugs. "I don't know yet. Maybe when I'm older, I'll add something next to it. Maybe nothing. You nod. Some marks are made for the future, even when the future feels a long way off. You leave the field as the sun climbs higher. Laughter fades behind you, and you realize something gentle, something true. Not every Viking tattoo was a prayer, a punishment, or a battle scar. Some were practice. Some were play. Some were just a teenager saying, "Let me belong to something, even if I don't know what yet." And those might be the most human marks of all. The sky is overcast when you wake. Not the soft, dreamy kind of gray that hugs the trees and whispers you back to sleep, but a heavier gloom. A sky that feels like it's pressing down, waiting for something to change. And change is exactly what's coming. You follow a path down a rocky hillside toward a village you haven't seen before. It looks different, quieter, neater, even. There's a church bell in the distance, a small wooden cross nailed above a doorway. This isn't the old Viking world you've been walking through. This is a world in transition. Today, you arrive at a moment in history where ink met religion, and the two didn't exactly get along. Because as Christianity spread across Scandinavia, Viking culture didn't vanish overnight, but it began to shift. Shrines turned to chapels. Sagas softened into scripture. And the tattoos? Well, they became controversial. You find a man sitting near the church, sharpening a blade. His forearms are covered in faded ink, runes, knots, a raven's beak disappearing under his sleeve. He catches your eye. "You're looking for stories," he says flatly. You nod. He sighs. "Be careful which ones you ask for." You learn quickly that Christianity didn't just bring new gods. It brought new rules. Roman clerics, Frankish missionaries, and Nordic converts alike began to look at tattooing with suspicion. They didn't see power or beauty or belonging. They saw paganism. And sometimes devilry. There are historical accounts, some fragmentary, some fierce, that warn against tattooing in the Christianized Viking Age. Ecclesiastical leaders argued the body was a temple, and decorating it was a form of defilement. Runes were no longer sacred. They were heretical, especially when they invoked the old gods. One bishop even declared that those marked by runes shall not be marked by grace. Ouch! You find yourself inside a small chapel, wooden, drafty, but tidy. Candles flicker beside rough-hewn pews. At the front stands a young priest with gentle eyes. He rolls up his sleeve slightly and shows you a faded rune, almost scrubbed out. "I got it before I was ordained," he says. "It used to mean protection. Now it's just ink." You ask if he regrets it. He hesitates, then shakes his head. "It reminds me who I was." That matters, too. Out in the graveyard, you walk among stones, some carved with crosses, others still bearing old Norse symbols. A kind of compromise. A foot in both worlds. You kneel beside one. A small stone, worn smooth, the carving almost gone, but just visible as a Valknut. The three interlocking triangles often tie to Odin and the afterlife, buried in consecrated ground. Someone made a decision there, and maybe someone else looked the other way. Not all Christians hated tattoos. Some accepted them quietly. Some, especially those who traveled, used them for protection, much like their pagan neighbors. A cross on the wrist, a fish symbol behind the ear. Simple, small, blessed intent. There's even evidence that some Christian Vikings continue to tattoo symbols related to Christ. The Chi Rho, perhaps, or simple prayer lines in runic script. You wonder if they felt caught between two systems. Try and honor both gods and God. Try not to erase everything. You return to the village, where an older woman sits by a loom. Her fingers are stiff with age, but she weaves with care. Her arms are bare. You ask, "Did you ever have tattoos?" She chuckles, low and bitter. "Once," she says. She doesn't elaborate, but her eyes linger on a young girl across the way, sleeve rolled, fresh ink peeking out. A knot, small, discreet. The old woman smiles. "They'll never stop it," she says. "They can only bury it deeper." You realize something as the sun dips low behind the hills. When Christianity arrived, it didn't wipe tattoos from Viking skin. It made them quieter, more secret, less defiant, more layered. People didn't stop marking themselves. They just started hiding it better. And you understand now that ink is not always about what's shown. Sometimes it's about what survives beneath, under sleeves, under shame, under doctrine. You walk out of the village at twilight, your own tattoo still humming quietly under your skin. You think of the man by the church, the priest in the chapel, the woman at the loom, all still carrying their stories, even if they don't say them out loud anymore. Especially then, you wake to silence, not the peaceful hush of morning mist or the lull of waves against a hull. This silence is heavier, older, the kind of quiet that settles in the bones, the kind that lingers where life has stepped back and left space for memory. You stand slowly. You're in a burial field. The land stretches out before you in rolling mounds. Each one marks a body, some chieftain, some warriors, some forgotten souls who never made it into saga. Stones ring the graves in quiet reverence. The grass sways like breath. The trees seem to lean in, watching. And beneath your feet lie the last tattoos of the Viking world. Quite literally. Because today, you're going to meet the ink that was buried. You follow a narrow path into a burial mound that's been partially excavated. Inside, a low ceiling forces you crouch. Torches line the walls, crackling faintly. The earth smells of peat and iron, of decay and deep time. Laid out before you, inside a wooden frame, is a skeleton, bones clean, arranged, revered. But beside it, wrapped in decaying linen and scraps of fur, is something rarer, a patch of preserved skin. And on that patch, ink. It's faint, barely visible. But there, just there, is the curve of a rune, a mark left behind not by bone or blood, but by will. Someone carried that tattoo to the grave. Not all Viking burials preserved skin. Most did not, but some. The bog graves, the frozen tombs, the ship burials entombed in the cold, dry earth, offered glimpses, traces of stories the dead chose to carry with them. You remember what one archaeologist once muttered under their breath during a documentary. The ink was never for us. It was for whoever's waiting on the other side. You step into another chamber, deeper now, more cramped. A burial ship has been reconstructed, its frame darkened with age, but its shape unmistakable. Laid within are the remains of two women, noble, perhaps, or priestesses. No one agrees. But on one wrist, faint beneath the leather wrappings, is a small ink symbol, a Y-shaped rune. It has the protection rune. A final message? A last shield? You can only guess. But you feel the meaning, like a whisper in the dark. There's something deeply human about this. You think of modern people who choose to be buried with tattoos uncovered, unremoved, unapologetic, marks that spoke to who they were, what they survived, what they loved. And now, here in the cool soil of Viking tomb, you feel that same sense of permanence. This was never about display. This was about truth. You hear footsteps beside you, a woman in a scholar's cloak, an expert perhaps, leans down and points to a different body fragment, older, rougher. "See that?" she says, barely above a whisper. You squint. There, along a preserved shoulder blade, is a winding line. A serpent? A river? Some say it's symbolic of the journey to the afterlife. She says, "A guide." You ask her if it's common. "No," she replies. "But when we find one like this, it tells us they expected to be seen on the other side." And suddenly you understand the ink was their passport, their introduction, their reminder to the gods. I am more than flesh. You step outside for air. The wind is colder now. The trees don't sway so much as stand watch. You sit on a low stone near the burial ground's edge. From here, you can see dozens of grave mounds, some marked, some overgrown, all of them once containing people who laughed, fought, wept, and chose to be marked. You wonder what those tattoos looked like, what they meant, who they were for. Maybe some were devotional, marks to Odin, Freya, Thor. Maybe some were names, or lovers, or warnings. Maybe some were inked during life, and some were added in death. There's a saga fragment you remember now. A chieftain, knowing he was dying, requested a tattoo on his chest. A single rune, Rado, the journey. He didn't live to see it heal, but he believed it would guide him wherever he was going. You lie back on the grass. The mounds rise like quiet waves across the horizon. You think of all the ink buried beneath you, all the choices, all the defiance, all the belief that something of you should remain, even when everything else is gone. You close your eyes. You feel your own tattoo beneath your sleeve. Still there, still warm. The earth holds its breath. You do too. And somewhere deep beneath the soil, the ink remembers. The wind has changed. You feel it as soon as you wake. A dry, sun-warmed breeze instead of the misty hush of fjords. The air smells of spice and dust and horse sweat, not salt and pine. And when you open your eyes, the world is no longer the cool gray pallor of the north. It's golden, rolling, wide. You're not in Scandinavia anymore. Today, the tattoos won't belong to Vikings alone, because the Norse were not isolated. They traded, raided, voyaged. They traveled beyond the North Sea and the Baltic. And when they did, they didn't just carry swords. They carried ink, and they saw it too, on others. You find yourself standing at a bustling riverside market, not modern, but alive in its own way. Fur, silk, and spices shift hands under rough canvas awnings. Men with Slavic braids haggle over amber beads. A woman with dark kohl around her eyes examines a wolf pelt. You hear Finnish, Frankish, Arabic, and then you see it, on the wrist of the Scythian trader, a tattoo. It coils like a vine, sharp-angled, unmistakably stylized, different from Viking patterns, but not unfamiliar. Ink speaks across borders, even when language fails. You follow the flow of the market, spotting more tattoos, ink backs of hands, symbols near ankles, dots trailing along the collarbone, some crude, some ornate, but all intentional. Each one says, "I belong to something." You find a Norseman leaning over a table, speaking haltingly in another tongue. His left forearm bears a tree of Yggdrasil, but on his right, a foreign pattern, geometric, tight, almost mathematical. You ask. He grins. "Got it in Constantinople," he says. "Don't ask what it means. I just liked it." You laugh. Some things never change. In the 10th century, Vikings served as mercenaries in the Byzantine Empire. They traveled the rivers of Rus, set foot in Baghdad, fought under foreign banners, and all along the way, they encountered cultures who also believed in marking the body. The Scythians had tattoo traditions. So did the Thracians, the Picts, the Celts. Even in Egypt, there's evidence of tattoos dating back thousands of years. In fact, one mummy, known as Amunet, bears patterns so intricate, they rival anything on a Viking raider's biceps. Different ink, same impulse. You walk through a dusty camp set beside a caravan trail. A woman with long braid, possibly Baltic, has a snake coiled down her shin. She tells you it was inked by a man from the east. He used ash, honey, and ground herbs. No infection, she says proudly. Just 3 days of fever dreams. You raise a brow. She grins. They were very interesting dreams. Ink wasn't just aesthetic. It was currency, a way of building rapport, making alliances, showing respect, or claiming dominance. One theory suggests that Norse raiders who adopted local ink designs were doing more than collecting souvenirs. They were adapting, blending in, saying, "I'm not from here, but I've been here, and I survived." Some tattoos were diplomatic. Others were trophies. Some were warnings. You come across a small group huddled around a fire, passing skins of drink, comparing marks. One man shows a Slavic sun symbol on his palm. Another rolls up his sleeve to reveal a Christian fish overlaid with Norse runes. A third bears his chest, inked with what might be Greek letters, or just a bad attempt. They laugh. You realize something. Ink doesn't always translate, but it always connects. Modern scholars sometimes assume tattooing was purely regional. Scandinavian, Eastern, tribal, isolated. But the archaeological evidence says otherwise. Tools, pigments, and patterns show up where they shouldn't. In tombs far from their cultural origin, on bones that suggest a life spent on the move. The conclusion? The world was more interconnected than we give it credit for, and ink was one of its earliest forms of shared language. You sit beneath a twisted olive tree, yes, an olive tree, and listen to stories, some half-true, some half-remembered. One tale speaks of a Norse woman who married into a Persian merchant family. She kept her Valknut, but added a Zoroastrian flame beside it. Another tells of a man buried in Novgorod, runes on one arm, Hebrew script on the other. No one knows which god he prayed to. Maybe all of them. Maybe none. You think about your own ink, humming quietly under your skin. A symbol you still haven't deciphered. A mark that came from a moment, a whisper, a feeling. You wonder what it would look like to someone else. Someone far from here. Would they understand it? Would they ask you where you're from? Would they care? Or would they just nod and show you theirs? The sun dips low, setting fire to the horizon. People drift toward their tents and camps. The market quiets, but the ink remains on arms, on backs, on hands that touched 1,000 cultures. It's all still here, etched, shared, spoken in the language of skin. The wind has shifted again. It no longer carries salt, nor smoke, nor spices. This time it smells of asphalt, of subway brakes, of concrete warmed by a too-hot sun. You blink, and the horizon is gone, replaced by glass, neon, and the low electric hum of modern life. You've returned. But the past? It came with you. You're standing in a tattoo parlor. The lights are soft, but the walls are alive with color. Skulls, dragons, flowers, sacred geometry, comic book panels, constellations. It's overwhelming. Joyfully so. The artist is bent over a forearm, needle buzzing steadily. The sound feels oddly familiar now, like an echo from a shipyard or a longhouse, mechanical instead of manual, but still deliberate, still meaningful. You lean closer. The client's getting a Viking rune. You smile. Of course they are. You've made it to the final part of the story, the place where ink fades and comes roaring back. Because for centuries, Viking tattoos disappeared from view. Not just because skin turns to dust, but because culture forgets. The world shifted. The sagas went quiet. Christianity spread. Empires rose and fell. And the bodies that carried the ink, those stories, were buried, burned, or scrubbed clean. For a time, Viking tattoos were myths, fragments, footnotes, and then they returned. You walk past a mirror and catch a glimpse of your own arm, still marked from the journey. Your tattoo hums softly, though the fire of the vulva circle has long since cooled. But now you see others, people on the subway, at cafes, in airports, carrying the same shapes. The Valknut, etched just beneath a rolled-up cuff. The helm of awe, tucked behind a bicep. Runes on fingers. Ouroboros spirals on calves. You even pass some with a full sleeve of Norse iconography, a longship crashing through stormy waves, Odin's raven soaring above. You nod. They nod back. A silent agreement. We carry the old stories too. The modern Viking tattoo revival began in the 20th century. Slow, then sudden. Scholars published dusty volumes on runes and ritual. Artists rediscovered knotwork, symbology, myth, and the ink returned. At first, it was symbolic, spiritual, niche. Then it became identity, fashion, heritage, and now it's everywhere. And still, people argue. Is it cultural appreciation? Cultural appropriation? Misinterpretation? Do you really know what that rune on your neck means? Or did you just find on Pinterest? The debates echo online in forums, in books, in studios. But here's the thing you've learned after all this wandering. Ink evolves. It changes. It's not the same as it was in the bog or the boat or the battlefield. But neither are we. And maybe that's not betrayal. Maybe that's just inheritance. You step into a museum now. Glass cases, dim lighting, a fragment of leather with faded marks, a bone needle, a burial shroud bearing the faint shadow of a serpent. These are the artifacts, the relics, the remains. People shuffle past them, heads tilted, hands folded behind backs. And yet, some glance down at their own arms, tattoos peeking out, and realize, I'm in this story too. Not every modern tattoo carries deep meaning. Some are aesthetic, some are jokes, some are impulsive, but others are echoes, reclaimed roots, personal rituals, ancestral memory written back into skin. You return once more to quiet. The story has been told now. 15 parts, thousands of years, countless marks made by hand, by fire, by belief. You lie down. The light dims. The buzz of the tattoo parlor fades into the hum of sleep. And in your mind, all those people, warriors, mothers, slaves, lovers, rebels, seers, teenagers, sailors, gather one last time. You see their ink again. You feel your own. You belong. Let it fade now gently. Let the line soften. Let the runes sink into dream. You are marked not by ink alone, but by understanding, by memory, by listening.